This isn't a methods class, but I thought that it might be helpful for our understanding of political economy to present a couple of methods. Today we'll talk about content analysis, and then on Wednesday we'll be talking about historical structural methodology or perspectives. Content analysis is based upon, as the reading suggested, cultivation theory, which was developed in the 1960s by George Gerbner. The argument was that television at the time was the primary socializer um, for perceptions and message construction. Uh, Today, it's probably social media. At the time, Gerbner argued that heavy viewing, which he described as 4 or more hours of viewing of a particular genre each day, now social media use ranges from 2 to 3 to 4 hours, depending on the age group. So it might be possible to make an argument that social media has replaced television as the great socializer for our times. One of the things that cultivation theory discovered was that people that uh, consistently watched a particular genre, whether that was action movies or television dramas, or even for that matter, entertainment shows like uh, game shows, would argue that they became more shy, they were more lonely, and they were more depressed, which probably suggests lack of social interaction with real people has a significant effect on people's understanding of the world in which we live. One of the interesting findings was that people that watched television that had a lot of violence, like police shows, CSI, SUV, some of the other TV shows, Law and Order, did not become more violent themselves, but they actually became more fearful of the world. They interpreted the conditions of the world in their own position where they would be subject to some crime as greater than actually existed in reality. So another interesting result was children that would watch cartoons and animation that had a lot of aggression or a lot of violence. In the United States, those children would go on the playground and be more active and more aggressive, more assertive. However, the children in Japan and Canada did not have that same uh, inclination. And Gerbner and company, when they did the studies, suggested that that was because the culture in which the people lived was less favorable towards that kind of behavior. That meant that cultivation theory had to be modified somewhat, and it was, although the theory made certain claims about the mean world syndrome. People that watched a lot of violence on TV ended up thinking that the world was much meaner or much more dangerous than it actually was. Um, they made some modifications based on the findings of children's reactions to TV. Um, they added resonance and they added mainstreaming. Resonance was the concept that if what you saw on TV confirmed an experience that you might have, even if it was an individual or an exceptional experience, that would tend to reinforce or resonate with what you were seeing on TV. Mainstreaming, on the other hand, was the idea that the images that you saw um, were likely to be the same, whether you're watching a action movie or a police drama, which would be reinforced by the news, the nightly news. In other words, it was mainstream. So it wasn't just this would happen on a game show where there's an authority figure that decides what the right answer is or what isn't the right answer, or there's somebody in the background that makes that decision. And that would be mainstream to the idea that the president or a police official would come on the air and make a statement, and that would tend to be acceptable. In other words, it was mainstreamed across the different genres, and it would resonate with our actual experiences. So, in the process, what was cultivated was certain stereotypes and underrepresentations of women, ethnic minorities, uh, including in animation films. When I think about the larger themes that content analysis is able to identify, I immediately think of action movies, which will have some PowerPoints, and we'll talk about action movies as we go further in the semester. But there were several themes that appeared. One is that citizens were generally incapable of defending themselves. They needed some superhero or some action hero. And the interesting thing was that the action hero did not have to abide by existing laws or acceptable behaviors. And then the final theme was that when the status quo was defended and restored, then everything would go back to what they would say is normal. In other words, there are certain themes that could be identified. And if we talk about mainstreaming, um, we can easily go from entertainment to news frames. For example, the assassination of the Iranian diplomat Suleiman under the Trump administration. Uh, it followed the tropes of video games and distancing from killing, the effects on the audience from the cultivation of perspectives and beliefs and behavioral norms. There was not an outcry when Suleiman was assassinated by a U.S. Uh, missile. Uh, it seemed to be accepted because it fit the same themes of the hero and the action heroes did not have to abide by any legality, any international law, or any even domestic law. So the point here is that the construction and the constructions of meanings in film, in TV, in social media, in video genres also carries with it a certain ethic. It provides us with certain scenes, certain actions, certain roles for citizens, heroes, cops, lawyers, doctors, uh, politicians. Interestingly enough, there's not very many people that actually work for a living. They're background characters, which reinforces the idea that citizens are incapable and unimportant. I also think about the appearance of violence on almost all of the shows that are action shows or police dramas, um, and the representations of women. If you look at CSI, SUV, um, many of the shows will have women in positions of power, but they also seem to be lacking the number of buttons on their shirt that the men have because they tend to be unbuttoned or they tend to be much tighter, which would represent women as sexual objects as opposed to uh, professional uh, professional actors. I think the same thing could be said about depictions of race, whether that's um, with black female officials or the Black Panther, which we'll talk about, or Blackish, the TV show, which we'll also talk about. In other words, we end up with diversity without democracy. We end up with Disney um, in the greatest democratic country in the world advocating for hierarchy, whether that's in Frozen or Pocahontas or Mulan. Uh, And if we took this to a larger extent, if we looked at content analysis globally, we would look at India, China, Europe, France, the UK, and it reveals a global culture of hierarchy in almost all of the action movies or the top rated movies that audiences tend to see. There's a reinforcement of uh, this global culture of hierarchy. So, how would we do content analysis? Well, there's a number of parts. The first is you would define a universe. In other words, that means would you use all television programming or would you use women's magazines or all action films or all animated features by Disney and Warner? In other words, you have to define the universe that you're going to be looking at to do the content analysis of. Then there are a couple things that are very important for content analysis. The first is reliability, which is a problem of assessing whether uh, your findings are reliable. In other words, is the coder uh, well trained? Does the coder actually be able to the coder's ability? Are they actually able to identify the categories uh, that are trying to be coded, and how are these going to be operationalized? Second part of reliability is to have actual clarity in the categories that you're using. Are they clear enough to support the coder's judgment um, on which recording units belong in which category and which do not? So the training of coders and the clarity of the categories helps assure that the findings are reliable. A second ingredient for content analysis is validity. And the question is the category or variable, is it valid to assert that there is some correspondence between that category and the concept that it represents? To clarify the concept, the definition of external validity is understood as a generalizability, whether the results of a measure can be extrapolated to other settings, other times, and other places. At the same time, there has to be an internal validity, the matching of the conceptual definition and its actual operational definition. So if you're going to talk about um, the hero does not abide by any laws, how do you operationalize this? Does this mean that the hero ignores laws and with impunity is never punished or brought to account for that ignorance or dismissal of those existing laws, whether they're international or domestic? In other words, uh, you operationalize the definition so that there's actual evidence for the category that's being addressed. This may be a little bit confusing, but some of you may want to do a content analysis for your final paper. You may look at a variety of uh, images. You may be interested in looking at women's fashion magazines, for instance, to identify the certain themes that appear in fashion magazines. Or you may want to look at action adventure films. Could be superhero films like the Marvel Universe, and you might want to do uh, some analysis of what are the contents of those Marvel movies and how do they reappear in the different Marvel movies. In other words, you would establish categories of who gets to act, who is deemed unworthy of action, uh, what are the results of the actions, how, when we go back to normal, how is normal going to be defined? In other words, you may want to do a content analysis for your final project. If that's the case, I'm more than happy to talk to you individually. We can set up an office hour to discuss this and help identify some of the themes that you might want to investigate in your own content analysis. On Wednesday, we're going to be talking about historical structural methodologies and perspectives. So I will see you then. Bye.